afraid that was going to happen. He's throttled too, son. God, thank you.
I can't believe this.
All right, welcome to this week's Marshfield Outdoors podcast. We're going to have a good one this week. I've been looking forward to this. Actually, last year when I had one of our guests on that's returning for this episode, I think I talked a little bit about maybe doing a panel discussion at some time on turkeys. But anyway, look, Final Draw TV, our title sponsor, they have season 8 coming out on the Sportsman channel starting in July. So look for that coming up. Gonna be a lot of great hunts, a lot of ups and downs that they went through this last hunting season, but it's gonna be great. So look for that, all that coming out in July, season 8, Final Draw TV. So now we're gonna move into just kind of a little bit of introductions. First, I'm gonna start out with Mike Dye.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Mike, for joining us.
Sure thing. Yes. So I'm Mike Dye. I'm the turkey and grouse biologist with the Department of Wildlife Resources, and just glad to be here and be able to talk some turkey and whatever else we can get into.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I appreciate it. You know, I think we talked earlier, you're probably my second, third, fourth podcast. So I appreciate you trusting me last year as I was just starting out with the podcast. And now this will be episode 70, 71 now, I think it is. So we're rolling along pretty good. So I appreciate you returning. It's always great to see you and have you back. So thank you. Our incoming chair of our board, DWR, Tom Sadler.
Hi, hey, thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight. I'm glad Mike's here, the turkey expert, because I am not, but I'm I've been on the board for 4 years now, and as you said, Chad, I'm the incoming chairman, and I'm really looking forward to my time as the chair of the board.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you. I appreciate the interest. I appreciate you joining me. I think it's going to be great having you and your point of view and coming from the commission, the board standpoint of some of these things we're going to talk about tonight. And then another turkey enthusiast from right here in my hometown, really, Kyle Ott. You've been on one other time, which we had a great episode, and I appreciate you coming back on. But go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, just for the people that haven't listened to that one yet.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Kyle Ott. I grew up in Northern Virginia, and I have hunted and guided extensively all over the state of Virginia. I've been fortunate to kind of orchestrate my life around the pursuit of wild turkeys. I've killed turkeys in 43 states. I have hunted them in states with a variety of management strategies. And I'm pretty fortunate. I guess I get to spend around 35 days of spring field chasing turkeys, and probably 100 to 120 days a year field chasing critters. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and just provide some perspective to the wild turkey management conversation from a guy who has really hunted turkeys all over the country. And just seen them managed in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
Well, Kyle, I think you bring some great insight from things that you do. And then, of course, both of us, all of us kind of have a stake here for all the resources that we have here in the Commonwealth. This is going to be great conversation. We might have Dr. Mike Chamberlain get on. He was dealing with some Wi-Fi issues. So if he jumps in, we're going to go ahead and introduce him. But we'll see. I hope he can jump in. I think he'd give some great perspective from his research standpoint. But 24,447, that's the number. That is the number of turkeys killed this spring, and it's up from our big year in 2015 of 20,580. Mike, I'm going to start off with you. What does this tell us? What is this? Obviously it's something we need to celebrate. And, we really, from our standpoint as hunters and consumers of the resource, kind of applaud the DWR for the work they've done to get the wild turkey to where it's at now.
Yeah, so certainly, of course, I've only been in the position now for 2 years, so I can't take credit for too much. So I think our predecessors put us in a really good position. We've done a lot of conservative management over the years with our turkeys, and I think that set us up to be in a good place from a turkey management standpoint. So I think that's, if I could credit any one thing, I think that would be, where I would start. But yeah, we've had a very good harvest this year, and I think it was kind of a perfect storm of conditions. We had extraordinarily good weather. I mean, I can't remember a spring that has been this cool and dry as we've had this spring. And as you know, as a turkey hunter, if it's cool and clear conditions like we've had for most of the spring, those are the days to be out there, right? So, so I think there were a lot of people out there hunting more days than they normally would. And I think that really translated into a lot more turkeys being harvested.
Yeah.
But we also had back in 2015, or I'm sorry, back in 2021, we had a really good hatch year. And that's the first really good hatch year from a statewide perspective that we've had in a long time. Really since that, that 2014, 2015 timeframe, our brood success has been declining a little bit. And so that was, kind of one of the bright spots that we saw on the brood survey data. And so I think that really translated into, we had a lot of 2-year-old birds on the landscape. And, again, as a turkey hunter, those 2-year-old birds are the ones you want to be chasing because they're going to be the ones gobbling their heads off. They don't have the experience to know, hey, that's a decoy. I shouldn't go over there and check that out. They haven't been shot at yet. They haven't been called to poorly. And so they tend to make a lot more mistakes and a little bit more susceptible to harvest. But I think it was just that perfect storm of conditions. It really shocked me when I started pulling the numbers together. And of course we kind of look at the numbers as they come in, and we got to I guess there were about 2 weeks left in the season, and I started realizing, I was like, wait a minute, we're already breaking the record and we've still got 2 weeks left. So, so things like that, kind of let me know it was coming. But I had anticipated it was going to be up from last year, but I did not anticipate this much.
Right. Yeah. Well, and Kyle, I'm going to kind of jump to you real quick. If I know you're going down the road and trying to get to the house to get back on, we talked a little bit about, how you've hunted kind of across the state and stuff. And you've seen a little bit of decline in some of the southeastern counties, I guess it is. About our hometown, you've also seen an increase in numbers. So I just want to kind of really highlight and kind of go off of what you're thinking as well, Kyle, the job well done first of all from our DWR.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have hunted extensively all over the state and all over the country. My brother was the youngest for a while there to shoot a turkey in all 49. And if I'm able to finish it up next year, we should be the only brothers that have done it. But we also assist with the management of thousands of acres here in Virginia. We're very, very in touch with the resource from a habitat management and a population census perspective. What I see in the data is some of the strongholds in the state have exhibited some relatively significant decline over the last 10 years. If you look at the short term, at the micro level, the 3-year to 5-year, a lot of those counties are still, maybe up 5 to 8% on their harvest this year. But the 10-year harvest numbers are down in the previous strongholds. And we have seen emergent counties start to replace them. I don't really want to speak to county specificity on a podcast with the way that people kind of cyber scout these days. I'm really not trying to bring attention to particular counties that may be exceptional or whatnot. But what I see in the data sample is, all of us that manage turkeys, whether it's at the state level or the local level, recognize that based on experiences around the country, there are a lot of case scenarios where turkey populations have boomed, and then the natural process seems to be that we decline and we hit a plateau that is really influenced largely by carrying capacity of those environments. Emergent populations boom, and then they settle back down again. It just kind of seems to be the natural cycle. So to bring contrast to that, I can see that happening in the state data. We have these new counties that are emerging, counties that used to be only killing 200 to 300 turkeys a year, or killing high fours, 500 turkeys a spring now. That was unprecedented, 5 and 10 years ago for those respective counties. Certain counties that 10 and 15 years ago were killing 450 to 500 turkeys a year are now only killing around 300. And what we all know also is that turkey hunting has grown in popularity exponentially over the last 15 years or so. And so the state really has done a phenomenal job with managing this resource. It's been truly incredible as someone who has hunted turkeys extensively for 26 years in this state to see really where Gary Norman, Mike was speaking about conservative management strategies, and Gary was the head of Virginia on the turkey side of the house for, I believe, that entire time, wasn't he, Mike?
Yeah, he was there for about 30 years, I think.
Yeah, so Gary was a big advocate of very, very conservative policies, and the state did really just, it's been phenomenal. I can't speak enough to it, and it's my favorite place in the country to hunt of all the places that I've been. But really, one of the things that I would like to engage in conversations about tonight is, there's not a single county in Virginia that is increasing in its population densities by really any more than 4 to 5%. And we just killed 17% more turkeys than our previous record, which means that we killed over 20% above our annual harvest average. And when we're talking about conservative versus liberal management strategies, the entire country, the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic, is experiencing a lot of decline. And we as a state, especially the last 3 to 5 years, I guess you could say, have really been liberalizing. And I would really like to engage, the commission, Mike, regarding, discussions about, hey, we are killing turkeys at a higher rate than we have ever killed them, and the population is not growing to sustain that demand.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting time right now.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it's an interesting time, and I think these are some questions that we should really be taking a look at when we're talking about being stewards of this resource.
Yeah. No, and I think those are great points, Kyle. And I think, no better, time than now for our new turkey management plan coming up, right? I mean, we're kind of phasing out the old one. I know we had to kind of push back a year. We're trying to get the bear management plan wrapped up. I think it was what it was last year, Mike. But one of the other things I wanted to touch on just with the data real quick, and then we're going to kind of get into those questions, and then I'm going to start pulling Tom into the conversation pretty good here too. When we're thinking about turkey harvest in the spring, this is a question I just have, and I've heard a lot of people ask this question. What is the reasoning behind legally killing bearded hens? Do we have an answer for that, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's more of a, there's not really a biological issue there. I mean, we kill right around 100 bearded hens per year. So from a biological perspective, that's a pretty minimal number, especially spread out across the entirety of the state. So, that's not really, having a major population impact. Maybe a few birds here and there, but it's not, not significant. But the other aspect to that is that, we need to make it as easy for our hunters to be able to hunt as possible. And experienced hunters can absolutely tell a bearded hen from a gobbler. But a lot of our new hunters can't. And one of the things that as we try to recruit new hunters, we have to make sure that, that we really are, reducing those barriers to entry, so anything that we can do to make it a little easier. And I think that's one of those aspects that, it's not having a population impact. So it's something that we can allow, and that we can, kind of teach people, okay, here's how you do it. Here's how you tell the difference.
Right.
And I know NWTF has been very good about putting out publications and information about, how to differentiate and things like that. So, that information is there, and as hunters gain more experience, they can, can learn to do that.
Right. Yeah.
So, but
Good.
I did want to go back a little bit to a few of the things that Kyle said there, especially in regards to our harvest rate. There's not a lot of evidence right now that we're necessarily killing a higher percentage of our turkeys. Our hunter numbers, according to our hunter survey data, have remained fairly stable. They've increased a little bit over the last 10 years or so, but they're still remaining somewhat fairly stable. The research that we've done, and of course most of that was back in the mid 2000s. We were killing about 25% of our gobblers on a given year, and that's a very sustainable number. And I think most people most researchers have pointed to a 30% level. So as long as you're killing under 30%, you're not affecting the population. Essentially, those are surplus males. So as of right now, we do not believe that we are exceeding that harvest rate, but that's a big question that we have. That's a question that's still lingering out there. Are we killing more of our turkeys than we have been, 10, 15 years ago? But that's a question that is out there, and there's not the evidence to say that yes, we are killing more, and there's not the evidence to say that no, we're not killing more. So I think we have to be very careful when we talk about harvest rate, and making sure that what we say is backed up by science and the research that's out there. I think in some states they are seeing some increases. In Virginia, we don't have the research data to back it up and to say, yes, these harvest rates have increased at this point.
Well, I guess my question, in response to that would be, so we just established that the hunter numbers are relatively stable, maybe slightly increasing, but back in the mid to early 2000s, we weren't killing anywhere close to 25,000 turkeys a year, Mike. Nowhere close to that.
So there's two things that are going on there. So first of all, as you know, we have the fall seasons and the spring seasons. And if you stack our two graphs together, you saw in the early 2000s, we saw a shift. We used to be a state that killed far more fall birds than we did spring birds. Traditionally, we have been a fall turkey hunting state. That shifted around the 2000 mark, and we started killing more spring birds. So we saw kind of that shift, and we saw kind of an inversion of the two graphs. Hang on a second. Okay, so now, if you stack those two graphs together, realistically for the last really 20 years, we've been killing about the same number of turkeys on a given year. We've been right about that 20,000 bird level for several years. It's just we've changed over from more fall harvest to more spring harvest now. So that harvest has just shifted to a different location. It's not necessarily, that we're killing a different number of birds, we're just killing them differently.
And do you think that shift, Mike, because, fall harvest, we're openly able to kill hens. So do you think that shift has helped with these numbers? Since, obviously one tom can breed multiple hens. So is that shift helping our numbers go up?
I think it has. I certainly think it has. And there's been a couple of different things that have gone on. And again, you talk about the conservative management that Gary Norman really drove. Back in about 1995, we really shifted a lot of our fall season structure to kind of to reduce a lot of the overlap with our deer seasons. And that worked to really substantially start decreasing a lot of that opportunistic harvest of fall turkeys. And so that's when we really started seeing that shift and that change from, that fall turkey hunting tradition to the spring turkey hunting. We started seeing people that were, holding on to their tags, not taking them in the fall, saving their tags for the spring. So yeah, I think that's playing a big role in terms of, some of the successes that we're seeing. If you look at the fall harvest this past year, this was the lowest. So we set two records this year. This was actually the lowest fall turkey harvest that we've had since 1960. Okay, so that's,
that's back when the graph last showed dates, like
right,
on
right.
the data.
Yeah, so when you look at that, and about half of those turkeys are going to be hens that were taken. So if you extrapolate that out to a statewide level and look at the number of hens that are harvested per square mile of suitable turkey habitat, that it comes out to about, we're killing about 1 hen per 35 square miles. Or I'm sorry, it's 31 square miles. So 1 hen per 30 square miles that's a pretty low density of harvest during that fall season. And I think that's one area that we can be a little bit more aggressive in some of our fall seasons, but we need to be very careful with our fall seasons because they can absolutely have an additive impact, and we can set ourselves back if we accelerate too much. I think that is somewhere that we can look at providing a little bit more opportunities. And hopefully, as we work through the turkey management plan, I think that's something we can, we can work on and see if that's even something that people want more opportunities.
Right. Yeah. Kyle, did you have something to add? I saw you.
I was just going to say, I mean, we killed about 6,000 more turkeys than what the total. We're right around 20,000 for our average combined harvest. So we're up around 26,000 this year, a little over 26, which to me is a statistically significant number. But to my point, where what we have seen, the point that really wasn't, that what we haven't talked about is those emergent populations in counties that used to be stronger, that have experienced rapid decline. And so I guess one of the things that I would like to discuss or to be focused on is Virginia right now is an anomaly, but there's no reason to believe based on what we're seeing regionally or nationwide, that we are going to be immune to population decline. Right. And there are some counties we do have the emergent counties, we do have the declining counties, and so we can see some of this decline that's taking place. And I think to commend Mike, Gary, and the DWR, like we absolutely have been protecting more hens, as you've seen that harvest shift in the focus to gobblers. But I guess when we can talk about Virginia turkeys in the short term, but what we've really seen nationwide is in 5 to 10 years, things can change starkly. Turkey states that used to be powerhouses in terms of tourism, in terms of opportunity, are now going to lotteries for non-residents and whatnot. And so I guess I would still to conclude that conversation, I recognize Mike's point there, but my concern is not really what I really want to bring to the conversation is just, are we looking at this from the short term, from the long term, and really what are we going to do to protect ourselves, which inevitably is coming down the pike. There's no way Virginia is going to remain immune completely to the declines that we've seen. So I'll just leave that. I'll leave that at that.
Yeah, and I'm in complete agreement with you on that. I think we're definitely, we're in a good spot right now, but that doesn't mean we're going to be in a good spot 5 or 10 years from now. I think where we're at right now, Matt Knox, our former deer coordinator, used to talk about sine wave deer management. So basically, as a population is kind of reached that plateau, it's gonna have peaks and valleys. It's gonna kind of ebb and flow just a little bit every year. And I think that's where we're at with our turkey population, and we're seeing those ebbs and flows. And again, I think you mentioned, you hit the nail on the head. There are some pockets that, historically had very good turkey populations that are declining pretty significantly. And I won't call out the counties again, to follow your pattern here, but, in the South Piedmont is a good example. Southwest Mountains, again, that's another good example. Those are areas where, historically we've had good numbers, good populations, and we're seeing some declines in those areas. Yeah. And some of it is again related to hatch success. And as we know, for example, Culpeper County was one that I was worried about for several years. Culpeper County, when I was working as a district biologist, because I didn't think the turkeys were there like they should be. And that has turned around, and now, Culpeper's, really moving up in the ranks in terms of harvest density. And we're seeing those shifts across the state. So, I think you're exactly right. There are pockets where we have to be very careful. There are pockets where we need to be more conservative maybe than we are. There are pockets where we can be a little more liberal than what we are.
Yeah. And I think this is going to move us really good into our kind of next discussion. And Tom, I'd love to get you in here. I know, Tom, when Tom and I talked a couple of weeks ago, he's the trout man. He enjoys trout fishing, and that's what his passion is, just like ours is the turkey. But, Tom, you have a big role in what the legacy that's kind of, put in place now for the next generation. When we think about this turkey management plan coming up, the reason why I thought it was so important to have you on is because, through other states, we've seen some wavering in the boards. Maybe they don't align with pro hunting, and that's how they take care of the resource. And so I think there's sometimes a gap between the public knowledge and understand what's going on behind the scenes. So, when you see this data, Tom, as a board being on the board, what is your role in going forward with this management plan that's coming up? And can you just kind of touch on that a little bit?
Sure, I'm happy to do it. It's a great question. So, as a board member, and then and as the chair, but really the chair is a title position. It's really, I don't have any more sway one way or the other. We advise, we provide oversight, but and this discussion is a perfect example of what I love to see going on, right?
Right.
It's a conversation. It's saying, well, I'm not sure about this, or I don't get in the middle of it and say, well, I don't care what you think, Mike, this is what it's going to be. We don't do that.
Right.
And it isn't right for us to do that. What we want to do is create that opportunity for these discussions. And so I'm very, Gary Norman is a family friend. He's the legacy here. I'm in Verona, Virginia, right? So we have an office here, and Larry Moan's a friend of mine. The guys here, I was just out with them and with Mike Bednarski last week, looking at trout water. I don't want to get off topic, but it's the point I'm making is that having that discussion is important, and I encourage people to have those discussions. We have professionals like Mike. We have professionals like who are out there guiding. I'm a fly fishing guide, right? So I understand that perspective. If I have a sort of a proclivity, it is towards the precautionary approach to things. And so when I hear conversations where people are beginning to be concerned, especially guides and outfitters who are beginning to get concerned, that resonates with me. And I want, the good thing is, I know that's going to be discussed at headquarters. I know it's going to be discussed in the committee meetings and in the board meetings. What is really important is that we do have these management plans, and we're in the process of doing another one. And it is just because of the things that have been raised about evolving conditions, about evolving populations, that we as a board have to rely on the professionals to give us their best thinking. If they, and when they do that with the benefit of public input, that is exactly the kind of thing that as a board, and certainly as the chairman, I want to see. And so, and honestly, conversations like this are important. I wish there were 100 of them a month going on, or because it is the opportunity for the department to show off the great work that's being done. And I'm not just blowing smoke at
Right.
you guys. I'm just saying I've been there for a few years now, and I'm very impressed with this. And it's not, and I think we're going to probably get into this a little bit, it's not necessarily what you see all the time in other places.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to stop for a second because I do want to answer your question about sort of board perspective on hunting and fishing. So,
right. Yeah. Like I said, I kind of started with it. We're seeing some states out west that the whole reason why I wanted to do this panel discussion, have you on, is just, I think it's so important to try to bridge that gap between the public and the public representatives of this resource, right? That's what I feel like the position you all are in, protect this resource, provide us with the information, the data you collect each year, and then continue to make our regulations based off of that stuff. But, as we move, even though technology continues to move forward, I feel like there's a huge disconnect between the information and the public and that outreach sometimes, and especially with the board. The board never really gets recognized, and to me, until something usually bad comes up, and then all of a sudden everybody wants to jump on them. So, I just think there's things that we need to work on. I think at the end of the email that DWR put out, it says, what objectives are not being met? We need to use the best available science and stakeholder input. And I think that's a huge statement right there. Go ahead.
It is. And that's exactly the point here, is that we have to be guided. Wildlife management, resource management has to be guided by science, the best available science we can get our hands on, and then the wisdom and experience of the professionals who look at that science and interpret it for us.
Right.
But we can't just rely on that alone. We need to have the people who have been out in the field, who are boots on the ground, waders in the streams, boats on the water, however you want. That's an essential part, because it gives a perspective to the science, and it's, gravity doesn't, you can't change gravity, but you can interpret where gravity is going to impact you. Right. And so when you have guides and outfitters that are out there on the field, or just individuals, participants in the field, coming back and saying, I saw this, in some cases, it may be a one-off. In some cases, you might say, well, that's the fifth person who said that in that area, and maybe that's something we want to pay a little bit more attention to.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important part of that phrase that you raised, is it's a balance. It's a not one or the other, but it's both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Mike, how are you dealing with these things as we're going into, this turkey management plan? Is it another 10-year plan? Is that, is that what's going into it? So, obviously we have to use what we have now, the science, the data, the public input that we have now. So what is the plan to put this together as we're going forward in these months now?
Right. Yeah. So we're in the very early stages, and I'll, very much what Mr. Sadler just said there, as far as public input, we can't do this without public input. This is a process that we have to have, public engagement, because, we are a public trust entity. Okay. Yeah. So we don't own the wildlife. It doesn't belong to the board. It doesn't belong to Mike Dye as the biologist. The turkeys out there belong to the people of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And that public trust, we have to make sure that as we're managing it the way people want it to be managed. Because if they don't support us, if they don't like what we're doing, then we can't continue doing what we're doing. They're not going to buy licenses. They're not going to, so we have to have their buy-in. We have to have, to make sure that what we're doing is fitting with what they want to see. And so that is part of this whole process. So there's two factors, I think, within, as we look at, management plan. We have the biological, and then we have the social. So we have to understand where people are, what they want to see, what they like, what they don't like, what are their values. Why do they value turkeys? Do they value hearing turkeys? Do they value seeing turkeys? Or is it just shooting turkeys the only thing that's important? These are the questions that we have to have.
Yeah.
So we're starting out, and we've been working with our human dimensions folks over the last few weeks. We're developing a survey that's going to go out to turkey hunters, and we're going to start asking some of these questions. We've got a lot of data from previous years that we've done these surveys, and we can compare, see how attitudes are changing, see how perspectives are changing, and get some information to start building this process.
Right.
And then once we get that process done, we're going to, start pulling in different stakeholders and make sure that we get as many different groups and diverse groups as we can. We want to bring in, folks from, National Wild Turkey Federation. We want to bring in, Turkeys for Tomorrow. We want to work with the Audubon Society folks. We want to bring in, National Forest, the state forest. We want as many different types of people. We want private landowners that hunt. We want private landowners that don't hunt. We want folks from as many different walks of life as we can to be able to sit down in a room together and talk about, okay, what's important for turkeys? What are our priorities? What are our goals and objectives? How do we need to manage for these next, 10 years? What steps do we need to take?
Right.
So that's really what it's going to look like. And it's going to be probably about a year-long process. I'm optimistic that it'll be a year-long process.
Yeah.
But a lot of that will be dictated by how we move through these meetings, and that process goes through.
Yeah. And Kyle, we talked earlier, and Kyle and I talk all the time about turkeys, and especially during turkey season. But what do you think as far as the hunting that you've done in Virginia? How important as a stakeholder, as part of the public, as a part of somebody that enjoys the resource, how much do you think this new management plan really weighs in on this wild turkey and the success that our state sees going forward?
Yeah, so I personally, I let the biologists quantify statewide numbers, but like I said, we manage a lot of property. We're constantly aware of what our brood production is and harvest strategies on those particular farms. I know that there are places that I hunted 20 years ago around the United States that, and even 10 years ago, that will never, and that I guided in. I was guiding in South Carolina in college. That would have been 2006, 2007, 2008 timeframe. I've guided in South Florida. There are a lot of places that I have been, places that I've guided that will never be what they once were 10 years ago. And so when we're talking about 10 years, and the reason that I say that, and I think that we could probably all agree, turkey hunting is much easier now than it ever was. My 7-year-old has killed 7 gobblers in 3 states. We have everybody on this. Everybody. Oh, I don't say that. I don't say that as a proud daddy. I say that because 20 years ago, I don't know a single person that had a 7-year-old that we didn't have tripods, didn't have blinds, we didn't have Dave Smith ultra realistic decoys, we didn't have tactics and technology that have accelerated success. And so, when I hear these conversations and I see these conversations go on about numbers, and we're talking about that. The last time we had data was 20 years ago or 15 years ago. Well, turkey harvest, the ability to harvest a turkey, I cannot say it enough in terms of how much easier it has become. My little boy started shooting turkeys at 5 with a tripod and with tungsten and red dots and decoys and blinds. Now you can stick them in any field. And so, to go back to your question, the reason that I bring this up is because I think that we should really be considering the technological innovation. The hunter numbers have not increased extensively, as Mike indicated, but the hunter success. I mean, we just killed almost 25,000 turkeys in a spring this year. There's some evidence that things are changing, and we do not have a single county in the state that has a population that's increasing anywhere close to that. But when we look at 10 years in terms of turkey management, look at Tennessee, look at South Carolina, look at Oklahoma, look at Kansas, 10 years in terms of turkey populations and the robustness of those populations, and the ability for everyone to enjoy a high quality gobbling experience, which I believe is statistically supported as the primary reason that people want to go to the woods. 10 years was an era ago in these states, and they're doing everything that they can to try and rehabilitate. So the criticality of this 10-year plan to me is severe, because if we don't get it right, if we become too liberal and we don't protect the fragility of this resource, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with being too conservative with this resource.
Mm-hmm.
It only gets better at this point. It only brings more people here because it's getting better. But if we get too liberal and we slip, there is plenty of evidence regionally and nationally to indicate that it's a very, very difficult slope to reascend and retake. So I think it's a very, very important conversation, and I really, really want to get it right.
Yep.
And be
and one of the comments that I would make in respect to that is, you're absolutely right. We do need to make sure we get it as right as we can, but there are always going to be situations that are going to arise that we can't predict, mm-hmm. and so having the flexibility within the plan and the way our plans are written, there are opportunities to revisit the plan and to make amendments and changes to the plan if we realize that something's not meeting our objectives or not doing what we intend it to. So that there are opportunities within that to kind of go back in and fix it if we start down a bad path.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, Mike, I mean, when you're talking about that, so you're thinking, or we're going to be putting indicators or thresholds or some type of indicator in these plans where, hey, this is kind of, my ears are perking up. I'm seeing this going on. We need to revisit this.
Yeah. And there's going to be objectives for each county and things like that. And we're, trying to meet those as we can. So I guess more where I'm going with this is, if we get into a situation where, high path avian influenza or something like that really begins to take a toll on turkeys, that would be a situation where, we might have to completely scrap, part of our plan and go back and revisit and say, okay, we can't do this because we don't have the turkeys to do this.
Yeah.
So those are situations where, we need to be able to have that flexibility to go back to the stakeholder committee and say, hey, the situation on the ground has changed, mm-hmm. and we need to be able to make adjustments as we're going through this. Yeah. And I think Kyle's absolutely right. Having that, getting this plan right and making sure that that we don't go down some of the wrong paths, I think is very important. Yeah. I think there are some things that we can do, and I think there are some things that we probably shouldn't do.
Well, do you think this is a more temperamental resource than, say, bear or deer? To me, when I'm looking at it, I'm kind of with Kyle on this. I feel like if it starts going downhill, it can landslide really quick. Whereas right. Deer they might pretty much bounce back pretty quickly. I mean, I just feel like this is a very temperamental resource that we have.
Yeah, they're I guess probably the best word for it would probably be ephemeral. Mm-hmm. So they're species that, if the situation is not quite right, they're not going to be productive. Right. And, so making sure that, we're taking good care there and making sure that, if we do have a couple bad years, we can, start making some changes. Mm-hmm. And so that's, that's kind of, I guess part of this process is figuring out, how do we make those changes? What do we change? If there's an indication that we need to make a change, where do we make that change? Yeah. Do we cut our bag limit? Do we look at season timing? Do we look at, canceling fall seasons? What are those decision points that we need to make? And, right. How is that going to affect this group of hunters versus that group of hunters? And having that plan and framework in place that enables us to be able to look at it and say, okay, here's a situation that's occurring. How do we go from A to B? And, and for the most part, I mean, this plan is not to say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. It's to say, these are the values. These are the things that are important. These are what we need to make sure to monitor and keep a check on. We have, it kind of provides and from my perspective, it really gives us sideboards to say, here's where we want you to go. Here's where we don't want you to go. And here's where we definitely don't want you to go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, Tom, how does this all work into the board? I mean, when you're thinking about, you can really take your trout situation, how passionate you are about the trout and how special a resource that is, because it's not all over the state. When you're looking at these resources and thinking about the turkey management plan, how does the board play into these decisions if these things have to, is this something that, Mike brings to the board and says, hey, this is what it's looking like, and then it kind of goes from you all and passed that way? How does that work?
Well, it's a great question. And yes, it essentially works that way, but it also works in another way where conversations like this come into board members who then call Ryan Brown or the wildlife chief and say, I'm hearing a lot about this. And it is not, those are the conversations I, as a board member, want to have with with the people who are in my district or anywhere in the Commonwealth, frankly, because I know I have a great resource at my disposal to say, Mike Benarski, tell me about brook trout. Tell me about, I go to someone else and say, tell me about this. So we want to hear that. Here's the interesting part of this conversation for me in listening to Kyle and you and Mike, is that the value of the plan is that it's a plan. But as Eisenhower said, all plans break down at first contact. And so at least as a board member, I look at plans as what they are. They're plans. And we also have regulations every 2 years where we come in and say, you know what, we all thought the plan was fine, but the conditions have changed. And we've got environmental conditions that none of us can say, we know for certain that in the next 10 years, X, Y, and Z is going to happen. So I have great confidence in the planning process. We'll look at the things that Kyle's raised and others will raise, and then the conditions on the ground across the Commonwealth. And that brings me back to a point about where boards are, maybe in other states. It's an interesting point that Kyle's raising, because he raises what I think is the precautionary approach to wildlife management. On the other hand, there's a whole constituency out there that says, well, wait a minute, if I can't turkey hunt, I'm going to go away. And when you operate in a regime a funding regime that the department does, where it's license based, where it's revenue from excise taxes, we have to be cognizant of that. And so to me, and this is a prejudice and I fully acknowledge it, I'm a professional fishing guide. I'm going to listen to guides. I'm going to really listen to guides. Right. And I also know that, guides have a vested interest in the resource because it's an economically vested resource, but they wouldn't have been a guide if they didn't really, 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 really give a damn about that resource. They're not doing it. I don't know a lot of guides that are in the 1%ers. I know a lot of 1%ers who hire guides, but I don't know a lot of guides who are 1%ers. So I think it's an important perspective, like we were talking about earlier. But I think sometimes when the precautionary approach gets applied, there are constituents or stakeholders that say, whoa, 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 you're just caving to the people that don't want to hunt and fish. And it is a bad mistake for people to make that presumption of at least this board and this department, because it is not true. But at the end of the day, like a guide, everybody who works for this department looks and says, what's the best thing for the resource? And I have my entire time on this board and my entire time in advocacy on wildlife resource management, that is the defining characteristic of the predominance of people in this business, in this, whether they're staff at DWR or whether they're at a federal agency, they care first about the resource. And I think sometimes it gets misinterpreted. And so I would ask my fellow guides and people like you, Chad, to say, look, sometimes they're going to make decisions that are going to take away some opportunity for you. But it's opportunity foregone today that means that my grandson gets to have that opportunity that I enjoyed when I was 15 years old, or Lord knows I'm not as proficient enough at 68 to think how good I had the opportunity to hunt at 8, but I was out there.
Right.
I just and you know, the technology that Kyle was going through, it's like, yeah, wow, yeah, geez, I never, yeah, you know, it's fishing doesn't have that kind of exponential change in technology. In fact, I could go on and we go regressing in some respects. So
you
anyway,
guys still have to learn how to read water, Mr. Sadler. That's they haven't invented an app for that yet.
Right.
And thank goodness.
This is Doug Roberts. He's raised some of the largest typical whitetails in North America. His farm produces the best hunting scents in the world. His life's quest is 200-inch typical whitetails.
You can find out a whole lot more about him right here on the Marshfield Outdoors podcast. Hey, we're teaming up with Conquest Scents for the next few months. Go over to their website, site-wide, 15% off. Use promo code Marshfield15. Till next time, we'll see you in the woods.
They haven't, or I think I would be out of business, Mike. I mean, Kyle, it's probably my only claim to fame is I can look at a piece of water and say, well, that's probably where the fish are.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think this is great discussion because, you know, and sometimes maybe it is misinterpreted, but I think that's, again, as much technology as we have, we keep talking about it. You know, podcasts like this is why I started it, because I think it's so important to engage people. Even though it's at our disposal, for some reason, sometimes it just doesn't get into the people's hands from the right people, and then it just becomes lost information. So, and Mike, did you want to add anything?
No,
I do. I want to jump on that point for a second, Kyle. It's that it is incumbent when those opportunities are made available, when that survey goes out for people, whether it's you, whether it's the National Wild Turkey Federation, whether it's Kyle talking to his clients or his mailing list, to say, look, if you care about this resource, here's your opportunity. If you don't offer your counsel, your advice, your opinion, your views, then you really don't have a standing to about the results
Right
when you had it. And I get pretty frustrated with people who say, oh, you guys never listen. And it's like, when was the last time you submitted comments? Well, you know, I don't know how to, you know, and I have no patience for that.
Right.
And I have to learn some now, but I mean, you know, it's trout management, the trout plan. We went through all this. We are going to give the people who care about the opportunities in the Commonwealth of Virginia to turkey hunt an opportunity to make their views known. Yeah. And I promise you, they will be reviewed and looked at and discussed. Right. And that is not a box checking exercise that the department does. The board wouldn't tolerate it for 1 second. Yeah. So, you know, but I put the onus back on the citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia. You will have the opportunity. We have the technology to be able to survey the entire Commonwealth for this kind of stuff. Anybody who's got an internet connection can go to the Department of Wildlife Resources website and find those opportunities. And they if they don't take advantage of them, I have very little patience.
Right. Good, Kyle.
I have a quick question. In terms of regulatory amendment and policies and whatnot, and I think this is to really to Mike and Mr. Sadler in terms of these policy amendments that we have referenced. Most recently, when it comes to Virginia and regulatory change in the last, 5 years. Mike, you may be able to give the exact year. We went to all-day hunting in the last 2 weeks of the season. Do you know the exact year that happened? Was that 18?
So we
19?
So
all-day hunting.
So we went
all-day
from
hunting last 2 weeks.
So back in I think it was around 2003, we went to the last 2 weeks of the season were all-day hunting, and then was it 20?
Excuse me. Yeah.
20.
Yep.
It was the 2020 season. We started the last 3 weeks of all-day hunting.
Thank you for clarifying. So I was misspeaking there. So that changed from the last 2 weeks to 3 weeks, and what I meant to ask was about the 3 week change.
Right.
So I know that the request came from internally from the board to go to more all-day hunting. And so my question is, we're once again, we're talking about precaution versus opportunity, liberalization and whatnot. My question is really kind of, so that came from the board. But what changes, what policy changes, I guess next year they're looking at maybe liberalizing the youth opportunity, youth and apprentice opportunity to go into a full week instead of weekends. Realistically, where is some of this? How does some of this, that starts at the board level, end up becoming codified at the regulatory policy versus stakeholder suggested amendments? Where's the distinction there? How does someone like a guy like me who does a lot of guiding, manages a lot of properties and whatnot, and my network start affecting proposals for regulatory amendments and whatnot?
You want me to do that one, Mike, or you want to do it?
Either way.
Go ahead then.
Okay, so there's basically two different processes that that can be used here. So essentially, when we do a scoping period every 2 years. So it was usually started out it's usually September, October timeframe. And we, basically ask the question, what regulations do you want to see changed? What are the issues that you're seeing? What are some regulatory changes that we could make that would fix the issue that you're seeing? And, is it a bag limit change? Is it, so for example, the youth or apprentice, is that something that we would want to look at? So what happens in that process, that comes to the turkey committee. So we have a committee of biologists that's made up of, I lead the committee, but we have biologists from all across the state. That way we get the regional perspective. So we get to hear what, the biologist in, Scott County, for example, thinks about it. What all these, what are the biological implications? And it's multiple biologists sitting in a room talking about, okay, is this an issue? Is this something we can do? What are the potential downfalls of doing this? And then we make a decision. Okay, do we think this is worth taking forward? And then if we think it's worth taking forward, we will submit proposal to do that. And then that will go, of course, through our administrative process, and our supervisors will look at it and make sure that they're okay with it, make sure they understand why we might need to make this change. And then eventually it's going to make it to in front of the board. And the board at that point can look at it and say, okay, this seems like a good idea, or no, this seems like a terrible idea. Let's not talk about that. Mm-hmm. And from there, Mr. Sadler, that's probably more, once it gets to that point and the board, I guess, adopts that as their proposal, then I guess that would be more maybe something you could take from there.
So does it go out to the public after that, or is it left intern? And you can go ahead, Mr. Sadler.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. So yeah. So once it goes to the board, that's going to be at usually a March board meeting. And then at that point, it's going to go out for public comment. So this becomes a board proposal that they're, soliciting comments on these proposals. Now, also at that March board meeting, if the board has any other items that they want to bring forward, they can bring them forward at that time. And so, for example, you brought up the idea of the all-day turkey hunting, and that's where that proposal was brought forward by a board member. It was something that, board member had been hearing from their constituencies. Hey, I would like to be able to hunt all day during turkey season. So that was an opportunity for the board to put it forward to the public, get public weigh in on it, see what people think about it, see what they like and what they don't like. And of course, at the end of that process, the end of the public process, the committee will get back together and we'll sit down and look at it. And from our perspective, from a biological perspective, we'll look at it and say, do we think this is worth bringing forward again, or do we think this is not? And an example, this past regulation cycle, we had looked at expanding the bag limit for the youth and apprentice weekend. So currently it's one bird per weekend. We had looked at changing that to a one bird per day. So, essentially what the rest of the hunting season would have. And we had a lot of public opposition from that. So we looked at it and said, okay, hey, there's something going on here that we need to take a better look at. And we don't think now is the time to bring that forward. So we brought a recommendation to the board. So because, in my position, I'm only an advisor to the board. That's the way I kind of operate. I'll take the biological data and make advice to the board. And then the board gets to make that final decision of, the yay or the nay on whether to move forward on a regulation. And then so once we bring that recommendation forward, the board gets to vote on it and decide, if this is a regulation we need, or if it's something that they want to, table or go back for more research, look into it differently or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Understood.
And there's one step in there as well, is that there are committees of the board that meet before the board meeting. So when the regulations are put forward, the draft regulations, the committee looks at it, and that's where there is probably more discussion, maybe more robust discussion, to use a word, about did you guys get it right? I'm hearing about this, help me understand, why did you guys make this proposal, et cetera, et cetera. A more interrogatory between the committee and the staff at DWR. And the members of the committee, the chair of that committee, are usually the ones that are vested in that area of interest. And so I can tell you, when the fishing regulations come up, I pay very close attention, right? I give deference to my colleagues who are much smarter than I am and much more successful than I am in turkey hunting or deer hunting or hunting in general. So then after that, the committee makes a recommendation to the board to accept these regulations. And I think there have been occasions where the committee has said to the staff, hey, we think you should change this. We don't think this is what it should be. And then that recommendation is then made to the board. And now the board can then say, no, we don't agree with the committee's recommendations, or we do. So there's plenty of opportunity. And before every committee meeting, there's an opportunity for public comment on items to be discussed during the board meeting, and often an opportunity to things that are not on the agenda, right? And then the same thing on the board, when the board there. So the public has a series of opportunities to make their views known. But as Mike laid out, there's the whole regulatory process of going from, well, what was it last 2 years ago to what is it going to be in the future? That's a well laid out and documented, and plenty of opportunity for the public to engage in it, and we welcome it. If you were at the last board meeting, we made fun of poor Darren Moore because he had never had a public comment, and and I chair the finance committee, and so we finally had somebody offer a public comment, and I made light of it at the time, but Mr. Nicely's comments were important because it was an opportunity for the public to engage, and
That's right.
and we want that to happen. We really do want that to happen. We do not want to operate in a smoke-filled back room, in a vacuum where people don't understand what we're doing.
Right.
We ask people to be respectful of the
Right.
process and respectful of what the board is, and we're not paid staff. We're volunteers, and we do the best we can. But we do really want that public input, and I hope I've made that clear today.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. Chad, can I check for
yeah.
just a second there?
Go ahead.
I just thought that the afternoon hunting was a fascinating thing to me, in the sense that there was a lot of negative public feedback about expanding it. And despite that, they still extended it by a week. We're now killing about 7% of our turkeys in the afternoons. There's been some biological data that Chamberlain did, came off of the Savannah River site. Gary was always a big proponent of leaving hens alone on the nests in the afternoon, and they did a study, case scenario where they had a hunted area and recreational area that they assessed poult and brood production in versus areas where there was not activity, and the brood production was higher out of the areas where there was less activity. And so I wanted to ask the question because I found it interesting that we chose to liberalize despite quantifiable data that existed, that maybe we shouldn't be disrupting these hens on the nest. And the feedback was still generally negative. So I just wanted to ask the difficult question, because obviously this is I'm sure that if you were to talk about menhaden or trout water with Mr. Sadler, or Mike and I could talk about turkeys all day long, that it was a difficult question that I wanted to ask in terms of how these policies originate, the different sources of origination, and then ultimately how to have some efficacy over the policies in the long term, if you are a guy like me or anybody else that's listening to this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the specific, but I can say that the take advantage of the public comment period.
Yeah, and I mean, the public comment period, I mean, it weighs pretty heavily on decision making. I mean, it seems like just your representation, Mr. Sadler, from the board, that's the way you all work this. You look at the science, you look at the data, but you take into account the people of the Commonwealth. And so I guess with that, have you seen a negative trend in public comment periods, like as far as people declining, declining?
That's an interesting question, right? That's a great question. Civility is a problem. And so that's why I say I hope people are respectful of who they're talking to. I think I won't speak for my fellow board members, but I'm pretty confident they feel the same way I do. We rely on the professionals. We rely on the professionals to give us the best possible advice on the science. We rely on the professionals to give us the best science on the human dynamics of this. We rely on our own personal experiences. We can't avoid that. We're humans. I think we also have to balance, and we talked about this earlier, is that there are, how do I want to phrase this? There are competing interests in beyond the science, right? So, listening to Kyle and his concern about the future, the science might not say, hey, it's something you have to worry about. We might, as humans, as board members, say, yeah, it still feels a little off to us. And so, you know, at the end of the day, what's going to win out? I'm going to say probably science is going to trump opinion, because it has to. But I'm going to say that the human side of it, the public input side of it, is going to have an impact on how that science is interpreted. It's like gravity, right? We know if you drop a rock, it's going to fall down. But you might decide, I'm not going to let that rock fall down on my head or my foot or my, you know, whatever. And so there's a dynamic there. You know, I think we do the best we can.
Understand.
And at the and I strongly believe from the bottom of my heart that the professionals at the department look at the resource first, and are willing to stake their reputation on that. But we also have the responsibility to provide the opportunity for people to take advantage of that resource. We're not going to get it right 100% of the time. That's why we have planning processes. That's why we have the process that we have to get to the regulations. I'm very confident that even if I don't particularly agree that you should be able to take 16 brook trout out of dry river, that's a good idea. If the science is there, I'm willing to say I will see where the science takes us. I'll also put a marker down and say, and if you're wrong, we're going to have a conversation about this. And so, you know, to your specific question is, if we got it wrong, then let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
No, yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to ask the question so that I could understand more and so that people can understand more. And, you know, I mean, the commonality here, I think, well, what we all know is that all of us love the wild. All of us love the resources. You may never have shot a wild turkey, Mr. Sadler, and I can promise you,
it wasn't because I didn't try.
If you want to shoot one, I might be a guy that could help you out with that.
Well, I might take advantage of it.
I would love to see you experience it. But at the end of the day, we all love it and are trying to do the best things for it. I think it's you know, not all of us come at the data, and you can make statistics say a lot of things,
sure,
do a lot of things, but we all come at it from different experiences. You know, I've hunted states that are one bird limits for residents and non-residents. I've hunted states that are draw only for non-residents. The non-residents pay $280 a tag to be able to come there and hunt turkeys. I've hunted turkeys in states that are 5 bird bag limits. And so, you know, when I come at this, I just think of, like, you know, protecting something that is, short of my wife, my children, it's right there. And it's a fascinating conversation. And I guess, you know, my next question, if Chad doesn't have one, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, is, does Mike think that we can sustain this? You know, our best hatch was 15 before this. We'll probably have a great hatch before 21. It looks like we're going to have a great hatch this year. What in the, you know, next 3 to 5 years and 10 years, do you see these harvest numbers going, and do you think that we can realistically sustain this?
Yeah, good question, Kyle. That was my next question.
Yeah, in the short term, I do not anticipate we're going to have another record harvest next year. You know, we killed a lot of 2-year-old birds this year. You know, you got kind of spotty reports of folks seeing jakes. So, you know, you know, our brood surveys were down in 2022. So last year, you know, they were a little bit down. You know, a little bit below.
Yeah, 1.8 poults per hen, I think, is what it was.
Yeah. So below, you know, well below the average. So, you know, I don't anticipate we're going to be able to reproduce this next year. I anticipate we're probably going to, and of course, you know, so much of it's going to depend on hatches, and, you know, the success of the broods. I'm a little bit worried, you know, with all the rain we had over Memorial Day weekend, especially down in Southwest Virginia. That's an area that's already hurting on the turkey populations, and I think their hatch is going to be down again this year, or at least that's my anticipation. This dry weather here in the Piedmont, I think is going to spell good things for us. I'm hearing quite a few folks that are seeing quite a few broods, and I think that's a positive thing. Our birds came into breeding condition or into breeding season this year in really good condition. We had really good mass crops over the fall, mild winter. So I think we should see a good hatch this year. So I don't anticipate next year's going to be as good of a year. I anticipate we're going to be back down within that 5-year average, potentially even a little bit below the 5-year average. But I anticipate over time, it's going to remain somewhat static, maybe see a slight decline over the next few years. But again, so much of it's going to depend on hatch success. And I think that's really where we're at right now is how these birds are going to hatch and what the weather conditions come at us. Climate change, whatever you want to think about it, there's significant impacts there. And, what the weather patterns are going to do in any given year right now is kind of up in the air. And I think we've been in a pattern for the last, really about the last decade where we have not had good conditions for brooding turkeys. And hopefully we'll see that pattern shift a little bit, and we'll start seeing some more of these successful years. And I will add, there was an interesting phenomenon that we noticed, and of course, our biologist and my counterpart in Maryland also noticed this. We had a periodic cicada hatch in 2021 up in Frederick and Loudoun counties, and those counties increased substantially over the last 2 years. Their harvest has increased amazingly, and it goes to say that food sources for those birds during the summer months are vital. And so that brings us back around to the habitat component and talking about if you have control or access to an area that you can improve the habitat on, improving that habitat to promote the success of those broods is going to do as much, if not anything, for us moving forward.
Yeah. No, and I think, Kyle, we could probably have a whole nother podcast on habitat management. I know you do a lot, and Mike and I touched on it last year, but I think this has been awesome information. I think we're at about an hour and a half, so it's almost around 15 minutes or so. This has been, to be honest with you, I appreciate all three of you joining me, because last year when I talked with you, Mike, and then Kyle, I think when we talked on the phone last year, I was wanting to do a panel discussion since last year, if it was live or something like this, because I just think it's very important. So, I think we could probably wrap this podcast up with this information and do, another one later on once we get down the road a little bit. But, I think the important takeaway from this conversation is let your voice be heard in the surveys that are coming out in the public comment periods. And if this resource is turkey, we're talking about the wild turkey right now. If this resource here in the Commonwealth means a lot to you, take action. Don't just sit back and say, "Oh, they got it," because Mike, you guys do a wonderful job, and we commended you at the very beginning, because if you look at the data from where we started in 1960, the data that started there to now, I mean, it's flourished, and we wouldn't be able to enjoy them like we do now. Now we're in the mindset of like I was telling you before, it's like you win the Super Bowl and you can celebrate it, but it's like, hey, we got work to do. We got to keep this up, right? So, I just appreciate all three.
Disneyland, Disney World at some point, right?
Right.
Play another, and you got a whole nother season to play.
Exactly. So, no, I appreciate it from all three of you for joining me tonight. And does anybody else have anything to kind of wrap up the conversation with?
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. It's been a terrific conversation as far as I'm concerned. I'm delighted you made the opportunity available, and I just want to reinforce the point you've made, that the citizens of the Commonwealth have plenty of opportunity to comment on this, to have their voices heard, and I encourage them to take full advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sadler. I appreciate it. Mike, anything to wrap up?
No, I again, just echo the same sentiments that, thanks for the opportunity to talk. I mean, anytime we can talk about turkeys and talk about what we're doing, we're more than happy to do so. And, we love getting the message out as best we can. And so, anybody that has a question about turkeys, feel free to call me, contact me, you email me or send me a phone call. Either way, I'm glad to talk to you, and, we'll see what we can figure out to, help out what we're, what problems you have or what concerns you have.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And Kyle, I appreciate you getting on. I know you had gotten called back into work, so I'm glad you still got to jump on. And I know you had tons of stuff on your mind to talk about, and I appreciate all the questions and the interaction. So,
awesome. Enjoyed it a lot, guys.
Yeah.
Appreciate both of Mr. Sadler and Mike's time. It's 9:30 at night, so I don't think those guys are on the clock.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. So continue following the Marshfield Outdoors podcast, and we appreciate all the support. We're in the 70s now in episodes, and we're going to keep rolling. We got some great content continuing to come. And until next time, we'll see you in the woods. Thank y'all.